This is the Westminster Standard Podcast, and I am Ryan Beasy. Today, joined by an all-star panel consisting of Zoe Miller, Charles Higham, Nate Xanders, and Ken Gesundheit. Welcome to you all.
Great to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having us. I hope you don't
Oh,
regret it.
I have many regrets. Having you on a podcast, Zoe, is probably never going to be one of them.
That's kind of sad, but I'll take it.
Nate,
You need to work
Nate, you
harder,
may
Zoe.
regret this one.
Yeah.
Last time we touched on this subject, you got a nasty gram from one of your soon-to-be former colleagues in your soon-to-be former presbytery. So
I decline to comment.
no comment.
No,
You've got to behave for about 7 more months, I suppose. And Ken, you're still in the mountains of the Lesser Carolina.
No, I really love North Carolina. It's fantastic here.
All right, and Charles, you're in the best Carolina.
Yes, South Carolina, town of Sumter.
Wonderful. Well, all of you are returning guests, so we don't have to do much by way of introductions. But today we want to talk about chastity and the requirement of chastity and how that has been perhaps undermined by institutions that are part of the PCA platforming those who are not conforming to chastity. So, where do things stand presently in the Presbyterian Church in America regarding sodomite lusts, church officers, any sort of unchaste behavior with church officers? Nate, you wanna tackle that one?
Yeah, my understanding is that BCO 82 is pretty simple. He that fills the office should possess a competency of human learning and be blameless in life, sound in the faith, and apt to teach. He should exhibit a sobriety and holiness of life, becoming the gospel. He should conform to the biblical requirement of chastity and sexual purity in his descriptions of himself and in his convictions, character, and conduct. He should rule his own house well and should have a good report of them that are outside the church. It's BCO 82.
Yeah, and that's the same. That's I think you read from the ruling elder component, the elder component,
Yeah.
and then there's a parallel with the deacon.
Yeah.
So elders, we've just added a year or two ago an explicit requirement that ruling elders, teaching elders, deacons must, in their character, convictions, and conduct, exude chastity. Charles, we've talked before about this. Why was this not really a change, but an addition to our polity, our Constitution? Why was it required?
Well, long story short, back in 2018, we had a church that was a part of our denomination that held this new conference that was called Revoice, and Revoice basically taught your attractions are immutable, you're just gay, you're trans, you're whatever, and you can wear those labels and all of that as long as you're not acting on it, as long as you're not, having sex or anything like that. If you're remaining celibate, then you are, you're okay. That's the requirement, is just that you remain celibate and not act on your desires. But it's this caused a lot of confusion in our denomination, and some people drew very sharp lines. I kind of stayed out of it for a while, and then I got caught up into it on the side B. Side B is the Revoice position, and I started even going so far as identifying as gay and all that. And then about a year or so later, completely rejected all of it and realized, like, no, this is not just another way of approaching things. This is sinful. This is wrong, and this needs to be outright rejected. And that's what part of the debates over this, where all the attempts to get this put into the BCO and address this explicitly came from, was so that we wouldn't have pastors going to USA Today and saying, I'm a gay celibate pastor, and that kind of stuff.
And so you're a journalist, in addition to a teacher. You're a graduate of the World Journalism Institute, that prestigious center of learning. So, Charles, you talked about being celibate, but our Constitution requires chastity. So, Zoe, can you help us with your lexicographical skills to discern the difference between chaste and celibate?
Well, again, reports of my lexical skill have greatly exceeded reality, but I'll try to help put a little bit of a plain, simple explanation on it for those of us who have never heard it before. So, like you said, we believe in a doctrine called concupiscence, which is to desire a sin is to something that is sinful. And so that's the plain meaning of sin. It talks about that in the Westminster Confession. And so like Charles was saying, the history of the side B gay Christian movement has usually come along with it the term chaste, which is good. It's good to be chaste, and chastity is when you reserve sex for marriage. That's pretty much it. When you're chaste, you are abstaining from something that you should not do unless it's in the context of marriage, which is really good. And, celibacy is the term that has been used kind of commonly to describe just not engaging in immoral sexual activity. So that's kind of a catch-all term for that. But chastity, celibacy is kind of the negative command, is don't do X. And a lot of the side B gay Christians have said, I am abiding by the Christian sexual ethic because I don't do X. But what the Bible actually requires is not that we merely abstain from doing the bad thing, is that we seek the good thing. And so chastity comes around, and it's a much better, fuller-fledged term to describe what the Christian sexual ethic actually requires, which is seeking sexual purity, especially if you struggle with things related to that. And, experiencing desires that are sinful is a part of the normal human experience. But how you react to that is a big deal. You can react to it by saying, I am going to try to find something in those desires that I can be proud of and that I don't actually have to let go. Or you can react to that by saying what the Bible said, which is flee from sexual immorality. And so, you're left with two choices. And the language of celibacy is just falling short of the mark of a full biblical sexual ethic. So yeah, celibacy is merely not doing bad sexually immoral things. Chastity is the fuller biblical picture of running towards sexual morality, if that makes any sense.
Mm. And Ken, your background is Polish, so you've got a lot of Roman Catholic kinfolk, I presume, and celibacy is often associated with holy orders, so-called, in the Romish Church, where there's largely just one act that is prohibited, but a wide range of activities might be tolerated as long as that one act is precluded with celibacy. But as Zoe says, chastity is that full-orbed, positive, in marriage, out of marriage, pre-marriage, post widowhood, post-marriage. Chastity is all of life. Could you help us see the distinction between the two, given your wonderful background there?
Well, I'm definitely starting to think that I might be your only Polish friend. So I'm filling a gap here, clearly. Yeah, I think that there's a gap here in how we view celibacy, especially as which has been described. I know many Catholic priests who are celibate, but I was talking to one recently that said that it seems like there's a transition happening in the Roman Catholic Church, that men who are married are becoming priests and allowed to stay married. Yeah,
not just as deacons, but priests,
yeah,
full-fledged.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's getting pretty wide. But as for what's going on with Sam Allberry here, I mean, I'm not sure what the stance of the Anglican Church is
It's
I mean,
all
I
right.
didn't-
They're not either.
Makes sense. I read a couple of books. We had some books assigned to us in seminary. I think one from him, and his perspective on this. And I remember reading it, and maybe I didn't grasp what he was trying to get at, but I think he was trying to come up against this idea of concupiscence, like just trying to walk a line. He was trying to live the way he wanted to live, but also make it seem okay.
And Nate, for folk, I know Zoe and Charles, you've used that word concupiscence. Nate, what is concupiscence? Remind us again. We talked about that at Presbytery a number of times, and
Sure.
always appreciated your
So
speech.
here's the book that Ken's referencing. I have it right here on my
great
shelf.
book.
And, I just want to read some of the people that did advanced praise for this book. Kevin DeYoung, Mark Dever, Steve Timmis, Al Mohler, Russell Moore, Jonathan Barry, Carl Truman, Jonathan Lehman, Andrew Wilson, and Paul Levy. And he does in this book, I'm going to answer your question, I promise, Ryan, but he does in this book say that he says celibate and chaste are somewhat old-fashioned words, but they capture the sort of thing being spoken about, single and sexually abstinent. So he does seem to hold to the idea in this book that we are to be celibate and chaste. But the problem is, and I wrote this in the book when I had to read it a couple of years ago, on page 63, I wrote at the top, this is where we disagree. Because it's at this point that he deals with, I don't think he actually uses the word in this section, but this is where he deals with concupiscence, which is that temptation, that inward desire, that orientation, that draw towards sin. And the very first line of this section, which I do agree with, is same-sex attraction is not a good thing. So it comes right out and says what we would all affirm, I think, this is not a good thing. But I think in this section, if I'm not mistaken, he does basically go on to say that this isn't sin until you act upon it. Right. And that's where you can see the problem where if you're espousing that someone be celibate and chaste, and as Zoe described, it's that running after the good things. But if imagine you run a 100-meter sprint and you run it really well, but the event is 400 meters, you're going to lose. Right. And that's kind of what's going on here, I think, by analogy, is you've got people that are like, I'm being celibate and I'm chaste, but they don't understand that it's even the temptation to the sin that has to be mortified, because that in and of itself is sinful.
Yeah. Let me play a clip from the promo work from that book where he discusses this. So we'll hear from him in his own words.
I'm not comfortable with the language of saying that same-sex attraction itself is sin. I recognise that same-sex attraction is not a good thing. The desires of same-sex attraction are not good desires. They wouldn't have existed before the fall in Genesis. They won't exist in the new creation. They are part of the consequences of the fall, that we have these kinds of experiences and these kinds of temptations. But generally, Christians have always distinguished between temptation and sin. And in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says we need deliverance from temptation and we need forgiveness from sin. And I think it is not good to confuse those two categories. All of us are people who have the capacity to be tempted. That's part of what it means to be fallen. Jesus says we're not to seek forgiveness for that. We're to seek deliverance from those temptations. We're to pray that God would help us stand up and remain faithful under temptation as we experience it. I think if you say to someone that their same-sex attraction itself is sin, you're effectively saying you need to repent of being fallen. And I'm not quite sure what that means or what that looks like, but I think that's certainly going further than the Bible does. There is another issue related to this. A number of people who experience same-sex attraction, particularly as they first come to terms with that, will feel particularly dirty particularly broken, particularly ashamed of the things that they are experiencing. And I think to then say to that person, actually, that you are experiencing same-sex attraction itself is a sin, I worry that could crush someone who is already feeling very tender.
So there you have it, from his own words, and Nate, you summarized that well, that we're not to repent, we don't need to repent of our fallen sinful desires, which is, of course, different than the historic Protestant position. That's a Roman Catholic view, as I understand it, that if we don't act on these desires, if we haven't chosen these desires, we don't need to repent of them. But our confession of faith says that this corruption of nature during this life does remain in those that are born again, regenerated, and although it be through Christ pardoned and mortified, yet both itself and all the motions thereof are truly and properly sin. So if I have this disordered affection for something unnatural, I need to repent not only of the fantasies, the thoughts that I have, the lustful thoughts, but of the category of sin itself. Is that the biblical position that Jesus teaches?
100%. Yeah, as I'm reading the confession here and I'm looking at this, I really think that this isn't hard. This isn't a hard concept. I think in our minds we know that the desires are sinful, but yet we don't want them to be. Right? I think that it's very clear to us when a sinful desire pops into our mind. We know it's sinful, but at the same time, if it doesn't fit our narrative, it doesn't fit what we're trying to tell other people, then we have to tell ourselves that, well, it's not, I didn't do it, so it's not actually sin. But Jesus makes this abundantly clear in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He goes farther to say that if you've lusted in your heart, right, you've committed adultery. If you've hated in your heart, you've committed murder, right? This isn't a hard concept. It's abundantly clear.
Yeah.
And lust isn't something that we choose. I remember in a Sunday school class, when I was in high school at a Lutheran church, and we were trying to parse that command, right? If you look at a woman with lust in your heart, have you committed adultery? And the Sunday school teacher, he was trying to help us distinguish between, well, if you open the door and there's this beautiful woman and she's in a bikini and you lust after her, that's not sin because you didn't intend to lust after her.
Yeah.
Which is just absurd.
You were ELCA Lutheran, weren't you?
I was, but not at that point. I was Lutheran Brethren. And I don't know if he was accurately articulating the official position of the Church of the Lutheran Brethren or not. Yeah. But
well, I know I'm taking us a little bit off track here, but I think
I don't know that we have
one of the end of that video there.
In a long time.
Yeah, the end of that video is you see two different organizations kind of basically promoting this, what he's saying, the Gospel Coalition and the ERLC. And you read the forward or advanced praise for this book, and one of the guys basically says, this is the perfect book to give to skeptics and wobbly Christians. The perfect book, Ryan.
Mm.
You mean the book where he spends 2 pages denying kind of the basic historic Protestant view of temptation and indwelling sin? So someone said to me at GA a few years ago, we were talking about momentum and winning and losing, and he basically said, it's not the conservatives or the confessionals, it's the moderates. Our biggest problem is the moderates. And because this kind of moderate middle that doesn't want to be, they want to be winsome so desperately, and they're not willing to say, no, Sam, we can't, and I can't endorse your book, or I can't give advanced praise for that book because you espouse something that's clearly outside of outside of what I've affirmed to believe, and it's actually dangerous, you know. And I'm almost at a loss for words. I mean, I when the news kind of broke today, I'm certainly grieved. I'm very sad for Sam. I don't know him personally. I grieve for his church, for the elders, and whole mess that's causing. But at some point, I've started to get numb to this, because it's like, of course, we fiddled around with our boundaries, with our standards. We made these exceptions. We invited this, like, I just, when are we going to stop being shocked? That's where I'm at. I'm not trying to be nihilistic or Eeyore here, but I just, it's frustrating.
What do people expect would happen?
Yeah.
If you do not deny yourself,
Right.
if you do not mortify even the desires of the flesh, what do you think will happen? Charles, as you were embracing this revoice, this side B view, can you, and I know we've done a whole podcast on this, 18 months ago, but can you kind of articulate what is the significance of and the danger of Alberry's position on sinful affections?
So real quick, just to rewind a little bit, that book came out in 2013, correct?
It's an old book by now. Yeah.
I was like, I think it's been more than a decade now that it's been out, but yeah. And I think one of the reasons why maybe it also caught a lot of attention was because this is coming at the tail end of the Exodus movement. And the Exodus movement was at that time, the largest coalition of ministries that were really seeking to address same-sex attraction and homosexuality in the lives of believers who did not want it. Exodus, of course, shot itself in the foot. The leader basically said, oh, well, this doesn't really change or go away. So we're done. Bye. And so a lot of people were looking for something that's like, okay, well, we need something that's going to be after Exodus. And I think Alberry's book caught on because it took a tone that wasn't the ex-gay mantra of, if you do the right things, then you can be heterosexual and not, and so I think that's one of the reasons why it caught on in those days, is because it was trying to provide something that was not that old model that had gotten so much bad rap and so much bad press. But yeah, I mean, as far as this idea of just, kind of embracing these desires and saying, oh, well, this isn't me. The analogy that I use all the time is when I was in Bible college, a guy would get caught staring at a girl and, be like, oh, you got a problem there, sir? And the answer was usually, I'm just admiring God's creation. And I'm just like, please don't lie. Like, when I would hear that, I'm like, no, you're not. Like, you're drooling right now. And, so it's that same kind of thing. We're trying to sanitize, or even just baptize our sin, dress it up with Christianese language. And now we're saying, instead of, oh, I'm just admiring God's creation, we're saying, oh, well, I just have an aesthetic orientation towards the same sex. I appreciate male beauty more so than female beauty. And it's kind of this trying to just reduce it to like, oh,
it sounds very intellectual.
Yeah.
Especially because it goes against the natural order.
Yeah. But it's this attempt to try to make it sound, oh, well, if we don't think about it in terms of sin and holiness, now we can kind of get away with saying like, oh, well, it's not so much that I'm lusting, but it's that, like I said, it's just, I'm just drawn to male beauty. And the fact that it gets sexualized is a problem, but the draw isn't the problem. But I mean, that's that's flipping James on its head. James chapter 1, when it says, our desires tempt us. I had that backwards for years, and that's kind of what goes into this movement. So it's temptation appeals to my desires, was the way that I thought of it. It's like, no, when you look at that passage in James chapter 1, it's the desires that do the tempting. And so this isn't a neutral desire. This isn't a just a fallen desire that is it can lead in a bad direction, but it doesn't have to. No, this desire has a goal.
This isn't just an appreciation for apple pie with ice cream.
Yeah.
You can enjoy, to the glory of God, a dessert.
Yeah.
And you can enjoy it so much it will kill you or give you diabetes. But there's no lawful outlet for this desire. Is that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. When it comes to something like same-sex attraction, I mean, that there is no godly end to that desire. And so from the very start of the desire, whether I chose it or not, that is, I mean, it's not, it's not a good thing. And where does that desire come from? It comes from me.
Mm-hmm.
So the desire is sinful because it has no godly end. And when I was caught up in this side B movement, I found myself starting to justify my lust, and it's kind of use that same line, like, oh, I just appreciate male beauty. It's like, no, when I really started to get honest with myself again, I'm like, no, it's not that I appreciate male beauty. It's that I want to commit gross sexual sin with that person. And being able to say that, being able to call it that has allowed me a certain level of honesty about my own sin, to say, this is not good. I am not good. There's no, this doesn't make me a better Christian because I struggle with this. This shows the depth of the corruption that's in me, that I would want to displease my Lord like this.
Yeah.
And it's from the start, whether I consciously work up the desire or the lustful thought in my mind, it doesn't matter. It's sin from the very beginning. And I can't tiptoe around it. I can't try to soften it. And I don't even call it same-sex attraction anymore. I don't even like that word anymore because it's too soft. I've just been saying homosexual lust. And I know, sodomite lust is some people will say, the sodomite term is not one that's ever really been a part of my vocabulary. So, but I'm comfortable with saying homosexual lust. Like, I'm going to call it what it is. It's not same-sex attraction, because attraction is too loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
It's
It's a euphemism.
Yeah.
It waters down what we're really dealing with here.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I've just started saying, no, it's lust. And even when people talk about same-sex attraction, I'm like, I don't even like that term anymore. Like, we need to call it what it is.
And that's such an important aspect to this. You've brought up so much, Charles, that with this idea that your innate disordered affection, one's own innate disordered affection, as Alberry talks about, if that's not sinful, well, then we try to find ways to justify, to explain away, to make a lawful outlet for it. Well, it's nothing more than just admiring beauty.
Well, it's not just that. I think what's really insidious about all this, if you remember back to 2018, 2019, it wasn't just that. It was they took the intellect, to the nuancing, if you will, or the excuse making even further, and tried to make this like a culture. They're like, well, there's a whole culture that I'm a part of, and and it was almost like I belong to these people, like I'm from a culture, we're all from a culture or subculture, and we have some sort of like belonging to that culture. And, that was something that was being spoken of a few years ago. I imagine it still is, but there was a whole kind of philosophy around it. It was providing cover. It's kind of like this, the intellectual speak is the camouflage for sin these days. And not just with this sin, but other sins as well. Like, we're just going to come up with some sort of philosophical cover or some nuance, and we're going to make it sound real gospel-y, and then that will be and then we'll be admired by Christians and by non-Christians alike for how just intellectually razor sharp we are, and how capable we are of navigating the difficulty of all of this, and we're really impressive to the right people. And it just continues to fail again and again. That the camouflage doesn't hide us for long enough. It starts raining and just all washes away, and we're just completely exposed in our rebellion.
It leads to where, the situation with Alberry now, where he's involved in an inappropriate relationship with another male.
Again, the watered down language, right?
Right.
Inappropriate like, what does that mean? That happened in a church that I'm familiar with, probably 10 or 15 years ago, but it was a associate pastor and one of the administrative assistants, and all the congregation was told was it was an inappropriate relationship. And it's like, so half the congregation thought, oh, they had a full-blown affair, and that wasn't it at all. It was just, she had begun to develop feelings for him, and he had not put up certain boundaries. It wasn't, so it wasn't nefarious on his part, but it was still enough to where something needed to happen. So that created all this confusion because the standard for adultery has become, it was an inappropriate relationship. Right. So we still don't know really what this really means.
Yet another consequence of language not having meaning. Am I right? I mean, it's, we are failing in our ability to communicate people falling in their sin. We're failing in our ability to communicate that sin will kill you if you let it live with you. And there's a lot of failures. And I think some of the early Sam Allberry book endorsements were a product of wanting to catch some of the evangelical kind of energy that was going on with the gay, or I guess a same-sex attracted movement, without capitulating too much. And so every time you read an endorsement of that book that's around 2013, it's always kind of the same kind of language used, which is like, this is a careful, and what they really mean by careful is it is a bad mix-up between secular understandings of sexual immorality and Christian sexual ethic. And that was the whole Revoice Side B project. Is it was a bad matchup of the two, with a wide range of people. Like, you have Eve Tushnet, who started out as like a Catholic YouTube apologist, and she's now in an openly lesbian relationship. You had Wesley Hill, who openly admitted he might be wrong about the traditional sexual ethic. And so the entire project was a conglomerate of a bunch of random stuff, and it was basically all an attempt to kind of get this middle way, if you will, between the traditional Christian sexual ethic and, cultural energy surrounding it. And we did, myself and my friend, Sarah Morris, we did an episode on the Side B and Revoice movement in 2022. I stand behind every word of what we said. And most of it was coming from Rosaria Butterfield, of course, who is amazing. But she said, it's not loving to let people kind of wallow in their sin as a way to kind of be kind to them. And she also said, private sin will be dealt with privately, public sin will be dealt with publicly. And what we've been tacitly endorsing for years is a method to get along with a certain type of sin that is letting it out to the public and making that your public facing identity. And I think that that's one of the most dangerous things you could ever do for anyone struggling with any particular sin. And unfortunately, the We warned back in 2022 that the consequences of flirting with an identity that is not compatible with Orthodox Christianity on sexual ethics, kind of putting that in a place where you can kind of make peace with that sin. We warned that that teaching that was being done by Sam Allberry and by Wes Hill and by Grant Hartley and by Eve Tushnet, we warned that that would affect other people. But what seems to have happened is that the sinful, I'm just gonna say, I really do believe that the teaching itself is sinful and it affects people's lives. And what we are seeing now is, I truly believe, a result of the teaching itself having an effect on one of the teachers. And it is really sad that no warnings were heeded, because Orthodox Christianity for thousands of years has said that if you make sin your bedfellow, it will rule over you. And I just think that there's every resource available to Christians who struggle with same-sex attraction that does not involve doing something so dangerous as what Sam Allberry promotes. And by the way, speaking of cultural conformity, is there any sense in which talking about, even mentioning, like Nate said, even mentioning a man having an inappropriate relationship with a woman is seen as totally taboo? It's seen as, even if it's not adultery, it's basically adultery. And there is a zero tolerance policy for anything even mildly suspect happening between a man and a woman in our churches. And so the fact that we don't treat homosexual problems with the same kind of rigor kind of shows where we might be at as a culture, as a society, as a church. And we tolerate a lot with regard to that particular thing. And I think it's because we are all too confused to figure out, how do I strongly speak out about celibate gay Christians without trying to sound like I'm condemning them for even feeling sinful impulses, because we all do. And, but whatever the solution is to assisting your congregants with feeling sinful desires and helping them to get over that, this is clearly not the solution. I mean, it's destructive. It's destroyed hundreds of people's lives, maybe more. I don't know. It's just the fact that this is something that we tolerate is, we should take a deep, long look and do some self-examination, because we can't continue to do this in evangelical Christianity. It's going to result in more of the same.
Yeah, I think I saw an article. It's probably the not the B, not the satire side, but the not the B. But it was, gay man comes out as gay man, and that summarizes so well the situation. As sad as it is, I was watching a recording of this man, Sam Allberry, where he was talking about how he's a gay man. He's gay. Well, what do you expect if that is how you view yourself? And this is a very dangerous position that the church has put him in. Now, he's not PCA. He's never been ordained in the PCA. He's a Church of England priest, or was. I don't know whether he's able to keep that ordination or not. But what is the propriety of a man who peddles his own experience of a very specific, very dangerous sin, and uses that experience to give him credibility to advocate for the historic position on marriage? It seems like, Zoe, you're saying that this has destroyed his life. The ability to coddle this sin, to say, I'm a gay man. I was watching a YouTube video of him at a Church of England synod, where he talks about these deep romantic feelings that he has for other men. And he knows that they're wrong, but he has them. And yet the church, agencies and congregations of the PCA have platformed this guy. Yeah. It seems like we've put a target on his back for the devil.
Yeah, and I think, I think what Sam needed was not a bunch of guys endorsing his book and giving advanced praise. I think what he needed was someone to pull him aside, someone who is his equal in terms of public notoriety and clout, to pull him aside and encourage him towards, towards right doctrine, but also towards marriage and to a woman and having children. And I just think he's robbed himself of so much. There's still time for him. I hope the same thing for Greg Johnson. There's still time for them to find a wife and enjoy the beautiful life. And I grieve. I grieve what this has done not only to his life, but also the church. I think the church in general has, we've failed. We have failed women, and we've failed same-sex attracted people or people dealing with homosexual lust, because we've told women, hey, go be a girl boss, go live your feminist dreams. Your company's offering to freeze your eggs, it's great. And then they wake up, they're 38 years old, and it's impossible to, it's really impossible to get pregnant for them. And it's a lot harder than they thought it would be. And it's hugely disappointing, and the pastors that didn't speak up don't have to bear the consequences of that with them. And this just goes along in with that. We have these people that could have this very beautiful, God-honoring life over here, but we're too afraid to hurt their feelings and appear to be these knuckle-dragging, archaic, hardline fundamentalists. And so we're unwilling to exhort them away from this lifestyle and towards what God has designed them for, truly. And I grieve that. If I seem to be pretty somber tonight, it's not just because it's late and I'm tired. I'm a dad. I'm always tired. Dad of 4 kids. We could have done this at 4 p.m. and I would be tired. It's just, this just grieves me, man. It's just really, I just think of Ezekiel 34 all the time, where the prophet basically lets the shepherds of the land have it because they've just failed so miserably. And it just grieves me that we've just so fumbled the bag on caring for people well in these instances. And we've allowed these false voices to have platforms and clout. And we've, yeah.
Well, what it sounds like you're saying is there's still time to care about our homosexually attracted gay brothers and sisters. There was a book written on that topic, but if I were to write the book on that topic with the same title, it would read a lot different.
Yeah.
It's
I'm encouraged. I was thinking about this. I had coffee probably 7 years ago, right when I first moved to the Knoxville area, and 2 guys that were part of the Side B kind of crowd were traveling through, and I was in seminary with one of them, and I think I crossed paths very briefly in seminary with the other, and so we had coffee. And I look back at that conversation, and man, in the last 7 years, the 2 of them have gone in such different directions. One towards repentance, and one towards continuing in that this is my culture, this is my kind of life. I'm not going to practice or give in to these temptations, but this is part of my identity. And I'm just so thankful that God brought one of them out, even if not both, and anyway, it grieves me. The whole thing is just so
Nate, what you're saying, I think is really brings to the forefront one of the biggest issues with all of this, is that a person will not be content with their level of sin. If someone is able to any level of sin, any kind of sin,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you indulge in sin, right, you're not going to be sated by that same level again. You're going to desire more, right?
Yeah.
Sin always leads you further into depravity.
Yeah, that's right.
And so anyone who's rescued out of this kind of mindset, Charles, like you've described, right? Nate, the guys you were talking to in seminary, it's by the grace of God, because sin is so dastardly. Sin seeks to assail us and intertwine us and drag us down. There is no way that someone can just be content with a small level of sin. If you indulge, you're going to want more. You're going to need more.
Yep.
And so eventually you're going to find yourself, you're going to start 1 degree off, but eventually you're going to be in 2 separate directions. And, which way?
Yeah. Yeah. Someone close to me, they have a family member. I've never met them, but they have a family member who's just destroyed their life by sin. And it was one of those things where it didn't happen overnight. It's this long, slow, it's that first hit's just not enough. I need a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And I just preached from Deuteronomy 8 this past weekend, and Moses says something really strange. He says, forgetting the Lord, and then all these things will happen. And then he concludes by saying, and then you will forget the Lord. And it's like, well, which one is it, Moses? Is it at the beginning or at the end? And the answer is yes. You'll start forgetting the Lord, and then you will have forgotten him. It's a slow process over time. And doing leads to being. But anyway.
Well, and then, it's just, there's such a contrast between the way that who I would consider clear biblical speakers and authors on this topic, and those who have wished to make peace with the sin. I mean, I speak of them in the like revoice side B conglomerate cloud, although not everyone is related, but there's certainly swimming in many of the same circles, have attended and spoken at many of the same churches, and so on and so forth. But there's a true difference between the Rosaria Butterfields of the world and the Christopher Yuans of the world. And what's that guy's name? He's from LA. Becket Cook and the Becket Cooks of the world, who say, I was dead in sin. I was dead. And I was resurrected. The Holy Spirit touched my life, and I still felt the effects of that sin. I still dwell in the body of death, but I've been completely redeemed. I've been justified. And one of the things that I think someone on X said today is that Sam Allberry's view of concupiscence is kind of teetering on the edge of being dangerous to justification by faith alone. Is like, am I redeemed from my sins? I do still need to pursue sanctification. That's going to be a thing that happens. But there is such a difference in the way that the more conservative, plain speaking truth tellers say it. And they say, you are going to experience sinful desires. That's a guarantee, actually, in the Christian life. But worldviews have consequences. And Rosaria Butterfield recently said, bad ones have casualties. And that is exactly what's happened here. And, they speak of their Christian life in the gospel and their process of sanctification with so much more hope than the side B revoice. The side B revoices are like, you kind of got to just live with it for the rest of your life. There's nothing you can do. But Rosaria would say, and Christopher Yuan would say, you don't. You actually should go to war with your sin. God actually wants you to live a life where you come out of your sin and you go to battle with it every day. And that they've described how they have come out of lives of homosexual sin. And it's wonderful. And it's really amazing to even know Christians in general who are so open with their, battle with sin, who have, gained a degree of sanctification and freedom from their sin because they've embraced it with the warring. Instead of saying, oh, well, this is kind of part of my identity, so I can't put it to death. Sorry. I can't do that. Sorry. I'm too comfortable where I am. And what you're telling people is that they can't have freedom from their sin. How awful is that? Who, if someone came to you and said, I'm struggling with pornography, who would want to tell that person, you actually will kind of be there your whole life, actually. There's no full deliverance for you. Like, in terms of this life, like, there's nothing you can do right now to help yourself. You just kind of have to say that you won't do it, but then self-identify as someone who is struggling with that. Like, No one would say that. And so that's what really irks me is the cultural issue. It's too sensitive to cultural issues. It's too sensitive to saying, "Hey, I'm gay. I want to go to your church. What do you guys teach about being gay?" And it's just like, if we loved that person, truly loved that person, we would say, "Brother, being gay is something that is strongly condemned by the Bible. You are a person who was born in sin, because we all were, and we all struggle with sinful desires. And what the world is telling you is that your sinful desire can be something that enhances your life, makes your life good. It can be something that you glory in, but that's the way of death, brother. That's the way that will. That's the way that you'll end up dying. And you just, I don't understand how we can come to two widely diverging paths in the Christian culture where we say, okay, well, this sinful something or other, as long as you just don't do the thing, you're fine. But and then on the other hand, you have people who say, let's be honest with people and say sin kills you. And again, it's so much more of an ethic of hope to say you can triumph over your lust. You know, it's just widely different. And I think we have to be honest when we in our churches are platforming people, when we are endorsing people, we have to evaluate everything. What worldview are they teaching? What imported assumptions will I have by listening to them? Will I think to a degree more that I can tell people to be comfortable with their sin? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you can't say yes to platforming them. You have to do the loving thing and deny them of the opportunity to speak to your church or whatever. I mean, it's just, yeah, you gotta be careful. So anyway, I can't remember what the question was, but
Charles, is this sort of Alcoholics Anonymous applied to the church? With Alcoholics Anonymous, you're always an alcoholic, right? Hello, my name is Ryan, and I'm alcoholic. That side B, that revoice, this is just the way you're going to be. What do you think, Charles?
Well, I would say it's worse than that. I mean, the difference I would say with an alcoholic, there could be physiological things going on there with the addiction and stuff like that. There's other things. Greg Johnson in his book Still Times to Care uses this. It's not really an analogy, but he describes like what it would be like to tell someone that basically what his point was just, this is all of this is packed into someone finding out that they're gay or lesbian or something like that. And he goes on this whole thing where it's like, imagine telling a girl that she's never going to get married, that she's never going to have kids, that she's never going to have a family, and blah blah blah. And it just it reeks of like a doctor that's just saying, well, you have cancer, you're never going to get better, so we're not going to do anything about it. But hey, we're going to like invite you to this community, and we're going to like hang out and have fun together, and all of this kind of stuff, versus the doctor who's like, you have cancer, but we're going to fight it. You have cancer, but we're going to do these treatments. We're going to work on getting you over this cancer. And so, yeah, I don't think that I think it's worse than saying that someone's an alcoholic, although I don't like that label either. I much prefer, I struggle with alcoholism or something like that.
Yeah.
Like anytime you're saying I am a
Right.
thing, then you're putting it in a dangerous place.
Yeah.
And Jared Moore in his book, The Lust of the Flesh, talks all about this idea of concupiscence. He has a section towards the end of that book where he says, if we responded to any other sin struggle the way that Revoice and Side B and all that advocates for responding to homosexuality, he says, we would realize it's nuts. And he uses several examples.
Yeah.
One of the obvious ones, pedophilia. What would we tell a pedophile? Oh, well, you're just a pedophile. You're always going to be a pedophile. But I mean, one of the things that Revoice, oh well, we have something to teach the church about what same-sex love is.
Yeah.
Well, now are we going to now just apply that same principle to the pedophile and say, you know what, you should be in children's ministry because you know something about what loving children means that we don't understand. And we realize, like, as soon as you read that, you're like, no.
Yeah.
And
Make millstones great again.
Voice and Side B would get mad about the comparison to pedophilia, but I don't care. I mean, it's true. If we were to respond to any other sin in this way, it's absurd. We would be opening ourselves up to all sorts of harm, all sorts of criminal activity. Even if we just said, okay, oh well, you're a stealing Christian, so you have something to teach us about the value of stuff, so we're going to put you in charge of the church offering or something like that. And it's just it's ridiculous that we want to say, oh well, you're just same-sex attracted, you're never gonna get over this, and because you're never gonna get over this, you can help us learn to be a better Christian, because we'll have pastors that'll say, oh well, my same-sex attracted friends have more faith in Jesus than I do, and things like that, and it's just it leads to this self-righteousness. I'm a better Christian because I'm resisting my same-sex attraction than all of you other Christians that are resisting whatever sinful desires you are. It's just, I don't know, it's more sinister in that way, because it puffs us up. And again, going back to the the analogy of finding out you have cancer, not doing anything about it versus like, no, we're going to go after this thing, we're going to do the surgery, we're going to do the chemo, we're going to do whatever we have to do to restore you to health. And that's the gospel. The gospel says we're going to go after this sin. We're going to grow in progressive sanctification. We're going to renew your mind after the image of your creator. We're going to make you fit for heaven. And that's the good news of the gospel, not, well, you're a sinner, you're just going to struggle. Hey, come hang out with us at this conference and we can all just have a pity party together about how we're never getting better.
Cuddle,
Yeah.
And Charles, I think it's well taken, because I'm sorry, I'm womanly speaking again. I appreciate that. Chivalry is not dead. If they say that the PCA sidelines women, which they do, many people are saying that my husband's going to be so mad that I did my Trump on the podcast. He hates it. He hates it so much. But he's right, because it's not that good. But what I was saying is that, Charles, what you said earlier about how the people who were platformed as a result of the Side B Christian movement as those who were better Christians, there is a reality to that, I think, in the Christian world, where we take someone who has a public struggle and we say, okay, well, you must be uniquely qualified to have a platform because there's some sort of energy behind it. And I think, we are under pressure to say, you struggle with XYZ, and so we need to legitimize you by having you kind of speak publicly and platform yourself and your story. And I think in a certain way, I've never said anything negative about the platforming of Rosaria or Beckett Cook or Christopher Yuan. But the difference between those three and the type of people that Revoice platforms is that those three actually talk about hope and talk about the efficacious power of the gospel and what Christ can do in your life. The latter only talks about how it just falls short. It's like, Nate said earlier, it's the, run 100 meters and the 400-meter dash. It's like, it's not a story of hope. And so there really is an impulse, I think, we have in the church to platform people who have really openly admitted to struggling with something as the people who are in authority on that thing and can lead others out of that thing. It's like saying that the Kevin Hart should be the it's like saying Kevin Hart should be the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks because he's short and so he knows a lot about what it is to try to run harder so you can catch up. It's like, no, that's not going to work. you can't platform people just because you feel bad for them. And I think really there's a lot of that going on in the world right now. And I think we just have to think about not doing that for starters.
Yeah, that's such a weird, you're right. I've noticed that as well over the last 15, 20 years of being in the kind of evangelical world, is that there's almost like a rush to get someone in front of other Christians to like share their testimony, or like even kind of platform them at like a retreat or a conference or a college ministry thing or whatever. And it's like, this person's been repented for like 10 seconds. You don't give the alcoholic that's been the recovering alcoholic that's been sober for 4 months, like, you don't have him like give the big like speech about how to make this work and like how to do this. It doesn't make any sense. But that, I don't know, there's this weird impulse to like, we got to get these people, like, the testimony is powerful. We got to get the,
it's revivalism.
Yeah, that's true. That's what it is. It's that revivalistic impulse. We just gotta, they've got a story and they've got to share it. And
it appeals so well to our postmodernist age, where your story is your authority. Your experience is your truth. And so you claim to have had these experiences, and maybe they have, but I was listening to some of Alberry. It's yes, I know the bridegroom. I'm not missing out on marriage. I know the bridegroom. Well, yes, that's wonderful. And I think, if the reports are accurate, he is cooperating with the church. He's repentant. It does seem like he does know the bridegroom, but there's still the danger that he was placed in because the PCA and other communions platformed him, right? Our ad interim committee on human sexuality, that thing that was published 5 years ago, recommended 3 or 4 of his books, and the PCA bookstore sells them because they were recommended by that committee. But there's a grave problem with platforming someone who does not believe that the desire for sin is sin.
Yeah.
It's not just that desire is sin, and that, we got to try and push it out of our minds as best we can. But sin needs to be nailed to the cross, and it needs to be guarded until it dies a horrible, painful death. And when we don't do that, we kind of, our sin begs, this is really cruel, let me go. And we listen to it and we give in, the sin gets stronger. But instead, what needs to happen is what happened to Christ, nailed to the cross and died a horrible, painful death. And that's our sin. Our sin, he became sin, who knew no sin. He took our sin. Thus, we can have victory over sin. And in fact, that's what sanctification is all about, right? As we grow in life, we should be becoming more like Christ and less like our sinful self in the sinful world.
Again, and the maturity aspect. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. Again, woman coming out. But again, it's interesting that we seek to platform the people who are not wise in the faith or mature in the faith or have Christian experience that can speak to assisting others. It's the revivalism aspect. And, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4 that, he says, I'm coming to you, I'm writing these hard words. There are a lot of hard words in 1 Corinthians. And he says, I'm writing these hard words, not to make you ashamed, but to admonish you as my beloved children. For though you have countless guides in Christ, you do not have many fathers. For I became your father in Christ Jesus through the gospel. I urge you then, be imitators of me. Are we platforming the type of people who we could rightly say, that is a person that I want to imitate? We consistently talk about who are going to be the guys that replace Vodi Bakum, who are going to be the guys that replace John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul. And, there's some legitimate criticisms of conference culture and platforming that we could make here. But there are some legitimate things you could say about, there are men who in Christian history have stood out as those who imitate Christ, so we should imitate them. And it's good to desire that for our society and our Christian culture, is that there would be mature fathers in the faith that lead everyone else in encouragement and godliness. And so, who are the type of people that we are putting in front of everyone? Are they mature in the faith? I just don't think so. We have countless guys in Christian circles. We do not have many fathers, and I think until we do find some fathers in the faith, and until we start prioritizing, faithful ordinary wisdom, which is boring but trustworthy, until we start prioritizing those things, we're not going to do that well. I would put this in Colossians 2 is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. And, Colossians 2:8 says something along the lines of, do not fall prey to worldly philosophies. There's deceitful philosophies all over, and you guys are really being caught up in this weird stuff with angels. And it all sounds interesting. It sounds scintillating. It sounds exciting. It sounds like you are discovering things about the Christian life that your forefathers in the faith didn't know, and there's novelty. And I think that is where the danger comes from, is we're seeking the novelty. We want the new philosophy of living, and we want the new way to understand things. But unfortunately, as boring as it is, as few books as it sells, there's a pretty simple way to go about your life with sin. And I don't think people want to say that, but it's simple. I mean, it's not easy to do. It's easier said than done, but yeah.
Stop it. Stop it.
The
And no,
Bob
it's not easy.
Newhart evangelism method.
Well, it's when I was in pastoral counseling with John Kwasny back at RTS Jackson, I think he made us go look up that clip, and he was very old school. That every problem has a biblical solution. That, and he said sometimes the solution to your problem is stop it. And of course, accountability and encouragement and the means of grace, but fundamentally, stop it.
Yeah. Like, get off your apps, right? Flee from, maybe go to a flip phone for a while. In the case of some side B folks, it's like, you need to stop going to that coffee shop that has the barista that you're constantly lusting after. You need to stop going to that bar that has the bartender that you're constantly lusting after. Pick another one. To me, it's one of the things that I was told when I was in my 20s that made me sit up a little straighter was, we often, because this is pre-revoice, before I went to seminary, before I ever met anybody that claimed to be a Christian and homosexual. So all the sinful temptation that anybody was dealing with in terms of sexuality was always heterosexual lust, right? And accountability groups of teenage dudes and dudes in their early 20s it's all a handshake agreement that none of us are ever going to be too hard on each other. Let's be honest, because there's no real authority in the group, and we're but there was always the same watered down language of, I'm wrestling with my sin, or I'm wrestling with temptation. And what wrestling does, this is what I was told, was wrestling actually implies that you're actually fighting back. You're putting up some effort, like you're doing something hard. What most guys should say in that context is, I am willfully allowing myself to get pummeled by this sin. I'm not wrestling. I'm just, getting beat up, and I'm welcoming it, and that seems to be how a lot of the, it seems like the side B though is almost being honest about that. They're almost like, it seemed like Revoice over the years just became this kind of almost celebration of it. I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but that was the description of someone that went in 2018 and then didn't go again until like 2022 or 2023. And they were just shocked by how much it had devolved, over the course of 4 or 5 years. And that shouldn't shock us either, right? When when you don't create these boundaries and you don't have the proper doctrine of temptation and sin, like this is going to become, not an infirmary for people to get better. It's going to become a den of sin. But what do we know?
Yeah.
It's so accurate, Nate,
that it was an early red flag for me. One of the leaders in Revoice, Grant Hartley, was talking about on social media, very, very openly on Twitter. I think it was still Twitter then. It was before Elon bought it out. But he said something to the effect of, basically, like, I was at a gay bar the other day and saw a drag show, and it was as close to glory as I've ever seen. And I'm just
remember that. I remember that because Grant Hartley and Nate Collins, who was one of the organizers of Revoice, hated our podcast with Rosaria. They were haters. Yeah, I remember seeing that. Anyway, please.
Yeah, and I remember seeing that, and this was like early on in my trying to kind of reconcile side B with Christianity because they're not compatible. But I was trying to sort it out, and I read that, I'm like, that seems stupid. Again, going back to the analogy of an alcoholic, like, I don't need to get advice from alcoholics who hang out in bars. We would never counsel an alcoholic. Well, you just need to go hang out at the bar some more. Don't drink, but just be around it. Be around people who are drinking, all the people who have seen you drink, who want you to drink, all that kind of stuff. And excuse me, getting worked up now. And we want to we wouldn't do that to somebody. We know that that's basically like setting them up for failure, but yet here you've got Revoice, leaders. Although I don't think Grant Hartley's an official leader, but he's still very prominent in that movement. But it's like, he's saying things like that, like, yeah, I hang out at gay bars, and it's like, why would you do that? If you want to please the Lord, why are you making provision for the flesh?
Could you imagine if when I was in seminary at Covenant, if I went on Twitter and said, I went to a strip club last night and it was the closest thing to glory I've ever seen? That's the equivalent.
Again, that would not be tolerated in
a heterosexual
context. Yeah.
It wouldn't. I would be most likely expelled from school, right? That would make sense. But that's just a wild. Maybe he was out of Covenant by then when that happened. I don't know, but it's just a wild. It's wild that anybody would tolerate such a flamboyantly gay thing to say.
And so the Sam Allberry person, frequent speaker at PCA churches, recommended by the study committee, sold by our bookstore. Frequents our agencies as a guest speaker. I know of a pastor, a retired pastor, one of my predecessors at the church in Georgia, who was attending a church that hosted him, and he went and talked to the pastors and said, "Look, we shouldn't be platforming this person." And they told him, "Don't come back. You're not welcome here. If there's not room." And I think there was one prominent guitarist in the PCA who said, "Do we want to have a denomination that Sam Allberry's not welcome?" Well, his views are not compatible with our standards, either his view on concupiscence or the way he speaks about himself. That is not a chaste way of speaking of oneself. That I am gay, or I have deep emotional longings for men as a man. That would not be a chaste way of speaking. And yet, now that we have these guardrails in our Constitution, agencies and congregations found someone not under our jurisdiction who could say these things under the auspices of ministering to those who are experiencing unnatural lusts. And where has it led us? We've discredited ourselves.
We've had pastors disgrace themselves. We've had historic churches leave. We've had confusion in our congregations about what we actually believe about sexuality. I mean, that was the big issue that, you know, like random average Joe congregant would come up to people and say, hey, what's going on with this? Are we cool with this? Do we believe this? And so it was one of the most confusing things ever. And regarding the statement about, you know, I don't want to be a part of a church that Sam Allberry wouldn't be welcome in, that's such a weird thing to say, because Sam Allberry was never seeking ordination in the PCA as far as I'm concerned. So who are you actually trying to make room for? What kind of concessions are we wanting to look for? Now, if there's someone, and I get it, it's like there's a cultural moment, a lot of gays, you know, we're always hearing about the gays, and it's just like, okay, we gotta find a way to make room for them. We gotta find a way to like get them into our churches, which is good. I mean, there are elements of positive aspects to that. You want to get people who are suffering from their own sins into a church where they can hear about the gospel of Christ and redemption and restoration. But what is the point of getting someone who's gay into a church if you're never going to actually tell them that they need to give up parts of their, you know, sinful nature? What's the point? Why would we want to make room in our churches for that? And, you know, of course, Sam Allberry would say, do not do lustful things, do not commit lustful acts. But if that's it, you know, what kind of comprehensive, you know, fleeing from sin are we offering people? And why would we want to make that a turning point where it's so important that our denomination doesn't speak too harshly about the consequences of homosexual lust? Like, why would that be a big deal? It just doesn't seem right. It just seems like we're being too driven by cultural script than we are being driven by the biblical script, which makes us sound like fuddy-duddies, but frankly, it's going to happen to you at least once. If it hasn't already, I've cleared the bar many times myself because I am at heart an actual fuddy-duddy. But if you don't get called that at least once, you should be suspicious, at least a little suspicious. What are you doing with your life? So it's just odd that would be something that we would really, really need to make room for in the church. And I think there are people who, like Carl Trueman was a early-ish critic of Revoice. He was one of the ones who was cautiously optimistic of it. He would say, you know, I'm not sure if they go in this direction, that might be bad. If they go in this direction, that might be good. I don't know. But he, in 2022, after that one Revoice conference specifically that Charles was talking about, he said, there's nothing redeemable about this. And I think it's fine if you have a desire to bring in Christians who have sort of a different upbringing and thoughts about the sexual ethic, and they have hesitations about weird things that and clunky applications of people trying to help others get out of sexual sin. And like, that's a legitimate argument, is that, you know, the way that maybe gay sin has been treated has been clunky. People haven't really known how to talk about it in the past, and that's fine. But this is not that. This is much, much worse.
That article by Carl Trueman was a slap in the face to me. That was really the first time I was like, oh, there is something wrong with this. Because he said in there, you know, he says you cannot find any serious critic of Revoice that isn't dismissed as stupid, hateful, or just not understanding the you know, all the ins and outs of stuff. And so when you've got him, and again, this goes back to that pride, that arrogance of I'm better than other Christians. Other Christians can't tell me how I can talk about my sin or think about my sin or, you know, whatever. I'm the one they need to listen to, you know, and that's just it's ridiculous. You know, it's, again, if you can't be criticized, you've got to, you know, if you can't take criticism of any form, then I mean, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with your attitude. There's something wrong with, you know, I don't know, something. There's just something seriously wrong with you if you can never be corrected.
Yeah, and that's my understanding. I mean, I could be speaking out of ignorance, but that's my understanding of the way Revoice operated as a conference is it played pass protection for its own worldview. If there was people in the conversation, if you will, that opposed them and they wanted to come to the conference and be an eyewitness to what was going on, they were not allowed to come. I think there was at least 2 or 3 different cases of that where people basically denied the ability to purchase a ticket to come. And, I think the very first year of Revoice, a seminary professor gave a lecture or a sermon on homosexuality from the book of Leviticus that I understand, if I recall correctly, was pretty orthodox and faithful. And lo and behold, he was never invited back again. So,
That's
it's
so based.
yeah. And knowing him, it wasn't even probably as hard in the pain as I would have gone, but that's just the reality. Is even when someone presents something that is biblical in a very winsome and charitable, straightforward way, they're not gonna be welcome when you're trying to create an echo chamber and just have approval for your sin.
Well, and at the time of recording, I don't know when this is going to air. Tomorrow. Oh, beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
The
First
PCA
time.
bookstore. Yeah, usually it's a long time. The PCA bookstore has 5 books by Sam Allberry, including Is God Anti-Gay? Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With? A book about James, the book of James and Genuine Faith. A children's book, God's Signposts, How Marriage Points Us to God's Love. And then also a book on biblical manhood. Nate, you should review that for your podcast.
Nate, you're
just
muted.
kidding. My search did not pull up more than there were. There's more, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, I did have a conversation. Well, not a conversation, but an email exchange with Stephen Eshstock of the Committee on Discipleship Ministries that oversees the bookstore. And my understanding is, as of today or yesterday or whenever it was, they are reviewing these books, and they don't just pull things willy-nilly, or even in a situation like this where there's undisputed scandal, that there will be a review process, and that is ongoing, but that hopefully a decision will be made soon on whether the PCA will continue to sell these books. So I understand that you're frustrated. I emailed Stephen Eshstock, Sunday evening saying, "Hey, can we stop selling these books?" And he sent a very clear email back with lots of explanation that they are looking into it, but that they don't. I believe he said that he doesn't unilaterally order that books be pulled. He, as a Presbyterian, wants to have some accountability and is going to allow the permanent committee and the rest of the staff to weigh in, as I understand it. But the Gospel Coalition has already pulled all of his material, even after their, as Scarlett O'Hara would say, their mealy-mouthed statement. They pulled all of his material, so I don't know. I think it's concerning, a little bit of lack of discernment, that the General Assembly Committee, what was it, 6 or 12 people that were on that committee would recommend his books. But also remember,
everything looks attractive at the time. So, especially and that's the problem, is that when you get one endorsement from a main person, from a well-known author, then other authors will feel more comfortable giving you their endorsement as well. And so it's kind of a snowball effect. And I can understand why, at the time of the release of the Human Sexuality Report and studying it and saying, how can we be winsome towards our same-sex attracted brothers and sisters while still reminding them of the biblical orthodox sexual ethic, they should absolutely have had more biblical clarity on that. But I can see why at the time it would have seemed like a great idea. But that's the problem with not really carefully vetting things, even if they're endorsed by people you like. And it's fine that we have these groups of sort of approval mills, if you will. Like you have Carl Trueman. If Carl Trueman says something about a book being good, I'll probably read it, or I'll probably have a positive view of that author or whatever. And then, that author recommends something else, and I think, oh, Carl Trueman likes that person, so that's probably fine. And so just asking people to exercise more careful discernment is something we should probably start doing in the wake of this too, because, in hindsight, everything is 2020. We can all see clearly that they should never have endorsed the Sam Allberry book, but what can we do to make sure that we don't have this happen again, where a foundational document that helps us sort of understand the question in our church about how we deal with sexual sin, when in hindsight that ends up being endorsed by somebody who says a lot of things that are problematic and can't seem to be abiding by a Christian sexual ethic himself. It's a bad look. And can we, in good conscience, recommend the Human Sexuality Report? I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
No. There's some great things in there, but I've never recommended it, I don't think. There's some true things in it, but I think the New Reformation Catechism is a lot more helpful that the Gospel Reformation Network has published. Yeah. So, I'm saddened. Nate, did you read that? Did you say Carl Trueman endorsed "Is God Anti-Gay"?
Yes.
So, this was in 2013. I think our censors weren't operating at their full capacity then. We weren't as discerning in 2013. We had collectively forgotten about concupiscence.
That's right. That's right. And, I think with Kevin's book on homosexuality, it's clear that he holds the correct view. He's
the one who reminded the PCA of it.
That's right.
His Time to Stand lecture. That's
right. And Carl Trueman, obviously, with that article in 2022 or whenever it was. So it's obvious that, they don't affirm the big error here in this little gray silver book. Is God anti-gay? So, they've both done tremendous things to push back since then. But I think again, if we were all, in 2013, I wasn't ordained yet. I think, Ryan, you had been ordained for like 10 seconds in 2013. Ken, you might still have been in college. I don't know, man, how much younger you are than Ryan and I, but Zoe was still watching whatever cartoon she was into.
Phineas and Ferb, baby.
Okay.
Nobody can tell
playing
my age.
Minecraft.
Okay.
I was playing Minecraft on my laptop, unable to even discern that one day,
you could not. I thought you could not have gotten any nerdier in my view. You just did.
I should stop talking. I could make it worse. I could make it so much worse.
So much worse.
I may have been part of the beta for Minecraft.
Yeah,
when it was just coming out of alpha.
My point is that I think in 2013, pretty much everybody was whiffing on. We're all swinging and missing on this topic, and I think it's a reminder of how important our standards, our confessional standards are, and how a lot of the answers to the things that keep arising and recycling again and again, they've already been laid out for us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to come up with something new. We have to just return to the wisdom of our fathers and the Reformed tradition and stay close. I think the one issue that we're going to deal with in the PCA in hopefully this summer that will have to be like, hey, we really are having to veer into new territory. Final frontiers is going to be when we're talking about AI, right? Because the concepts were just not on the radar of the Westminster Divines, but we
have concepts of a plan.
We still will have principles, but this is all just a reminder to me of how important our standards are and how valuable. They're just a treasure trove to return to again and again on so many things.
Very well said, Nate. Well, as we close, anybody have any final comments?
I think the big takeaway, there are a few big takeaways for me, from my perspective. Number one, we have to stop pretending like clarity and kindness are diametrically opposed to each other. This is the problem we've been struggling with in culture for as long as I've been politically aware, which is like 6 years. I mean, we have to stop accepting and letting the culture set the tone for everything that we think about how to deal with people who are in certain situations. We have to lean more on our own biblical understanding than we do on the cultural script. And the cultural script says, well, if you want everybody who lives in the United States of America to be a legal citizen, then that means that you hate everyone that isn't a citizen. And that's not true at all. I love my fellow citizens, which is why I want legal immigration to be the only path to citizenship. And it's so, again, another example of something where it's been so twisted is that when you seek the good of others, the world is going to say that's evil and that's bad and you should stop seeking that. And we just have to reject that reasoning entirely. Otherwise, we will never get anywhere when we want to try to speak biblical truth to people. And that is one of the object lessons from the Revoice debacle. And the other thing is a biblical faithfulness that is worth modeling and following after is boring. It's not attractive to people, but we have to just influence people to reorient their desires towards what's good and right. You know, we're not going to want to seek a quiet life where we can glorify God and enjoy him forever. We're not going to want that. And the Christian trends are also not going to lead us in that way. We have to be wary of trends. And then the third thing is, let's see. There was a third thing. Anyway, there's just a lot of object lessons here. And I think the third thing is seeking a platform is something that should be done with great caution. And even more importantly, the platform of ordination. If you are someone who might really struggle with the sin to the point where you identify with it, where you think that your unique struggle, I think this might be something that comes out of the millennial era, so I'm sorry to all the millennials I'm going to offend with this, is millennials suffer from main character syndrome. Millennials suffer from something that says, everything that I experience is unique, and everyone else needs to know about it and accommodate my unique experiences. And millennials also buy those books when they're written, and they listen to those speakers that say everything about your life experience is unique and you have something to teach everyone. And if everyone would just listen and accommodate you, that would be great. And the world would be a better place. But we know that's not true. We know that there are people who suffer from things that are not good. And if we were to give the mic to them to say, your personal unique experiences is so great, why don't you talk about it? It's just, we just have to get away from that. And I say that as someone who voluntarily goes online and talks about my opinion and has a platform, which is very large.
And gets paid for it.
True. Which apparently is feminist, but we can have that conversation another time. But like, again, I'm someone with a platform. I get it. I've said true things. I've said not so true things. But when we start to see ourselves as being uniquely important and special in life is when we start to lose sight of objective scriptural truths, and we can't be led anymore. We can't be taught. We can't be guided in our understanding of our Christian life anymore. And so I think that whole situation has to be something we get away from. So
I think if I just wanted to add, a couple years ago, I took to social media and publicly repented for supporting and promoting Revoice and Greg Johnson and others. It's okay to say you were wrong. It's okay for us as the church to say, yeah, we promoted this guy, but we should not have. And we're not going to keep doing it. And we're going to reevaluate, what are we promoting? Why are we promoting these people? Are we promoting them for the same reasons we promoted this other guy, because he seemed like he had something to say? But are we going to have the courage to say, I was wrong, I repent, I helped promote this false teaching, and have opened up the church to criticism and condemnation from the world because of my support of this, and I'm not going to support it anymore? I'm going to come back to biblical teaching and say, this is what God says, and I'm going to stand on this, and not even just try to, oh, well, I supported that, but now I'm just going to just not support it anymore. But for us to actually publicly say, this was not good, I should not have been a part of it, I will not continue to be a part of it.
That's hard to say, but powerful in its way.
I remember being terrified when I sent out those tweets, but it was like the Lord wouldn't let me not do it. I was just like, I just have to do this because God kept hitting me with it for so long. And I was finally like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And then, turn off the computer and not seek any social media, and let whatever comes, let come what may. And, but it's good. And I have never felt better, about anything than in that moment, when I was able to say, this was wrong, this was serious error, and I'm not gonna do this anymore. It's very freeing and very, very powerful. And now it's almost even given me a little bit of a platform. So, which if you follow me on social media, you probably don't see a whole lot. I'm more of a lurker than a poster, but
his Patreon link is.
Yeah. Well, I think I would like to see the PCA. It's probably too late. I mean, it's not. I mean, there could conceivably be a fall Presbyterian meeting between now and the 30-day deadline for overtures. But I would like to see next year at General Assembly something where we repudiate some of the bad things that we have received, right? And we don't approve or adopt a study committee report, but we did receive, and it would be nice to see some statement that we sold these books in our bookstore and we're not going to sell them anymore. And this is why, and we're sorry that we did. All right. Well, Charles, Zoe, Nate, Ken, thank you for your time. Hope people will check out your respective podcasts, Reforming Men, Forward by Faith, Presby Girls. Charles, do you have a podcast? He has a mime cast, I see.
I don't have a podcast. I have an idea for a podcast, but I don't have one yet. It hasn't started. But my idea for a podcast is actually called God, Godzilla, and Me. At the intersection of giant monster movies and theology and all that kind of stuff, just because I'm a big monster movie nerd. But stay tuned. I haven't given up on it. I just haven't been able to focus and make any progress on where that might go.
All right.
Rock on.
Well, thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.